Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last day of Flash Talks here in this Vue Storefront Hackathon. I hope everyone is doing well with their project in the hackathon. There is still a week and some days left, so you still have plenty of time to get behind it. All right, so we have two speakers today. Our first speaker is Daniel Rowe. He is on the front end team at Nuxt. He's a founding member of Durang Young Professionals, and he's mentoring students in the future business. Today he's going to talk about Nuxt 3. He's going to take us to a deep dive, a very quick deep dive, a very crash course on Nuxt behind the scenes. So welcome, Daniel. How are you doing?
Hey, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a cold, grey day in northeast England, but I'm cozy and warm with a cup of tea and ready to dive in.
Nice. So I won't take you from this any further. I would just say, take it away, Daniel. I will turn on your screen and take it from there.
Thank you, Mark. So the aim today is to give a deep dive into Nuxt 3, specifically what happens when you type yarn nuxi dev. Because you know what you see. You see there's a Nuxt CLI. You have got a server that starts, Vite warms up. There's a Vite server, Nitro's built. And then if you actually just go to your browser, you can actually see what you've just started. So there's a Nuxt server you can then develop and code in peace. But what happens under the hood to make that possible? And I'll be as quick as I can, but save up all the questions you might have. You might be interested if you just want to know what's happening. But I really hope that as I show you what is going on under the hood, you might spot the opportunity to improve things, make them better. Or if the next time you encounter something that isn't working in your Nuxt app, you'll know where to dive in. So we're going to start in Nuxi itself. So we have this main function, which is the starting point whenever you run a Nuxi command. And all this does is pass your arguments and figure out what command to run. It then picks the command from an array and passes all the passed arguments to that command. So you can see the different commands that Nuxi has here. And they're all lazy loaded in different chunks when we build Nuxi into a binary. So that means only the code that you need to process the command you're doing is loaded. So here we're interested in the dev command. So if we open up the dev command, we have it wrapped in this nice type helper called define Nuxt command, which just allows us to add some metadata. So if you type Nuxi help, it'll tell you what you can run and what the command's arguments might be. But all that happens when you run Nuxi dev is this invoke function. So that's what we're going to dive into. The first thing that yarn nuxi dev does is create a server. Out of the box, it creates a server. That's, by the way, why you can't configure your server port and options in your Nuxt config file, as you might have done in Nuxt 2. It's because the server happens far before we even pass that file. It happens straight away. You can configure all of that with command line arguments or with environment variables as well. The thing we use to create that server is from listThen. listThen is a package that we've released separately and put in the Unjs GitHub organization. Like many of the packages that I'm going to talk about today, packages in the Unjs organization, we have produced, the Nuxt team have produced as we've been writing and coding, but they're really meant for everybody. The aim is it's universal JavaScript, hence Unjs. So not just for Nuxt and not just for Node either. Everything there should work in the browser as well, or in Cloudflare Workers, or in Dino. The concept is you're able to, for example, in this case, have an HTTP server that doesn't need to be run in a Node environment. And that's the server that we use, that we start when we first start your Nuxi dev command. Technically, this probably could be run in your browser, but that's not how we run it at the moment. We run it in the command line. And once that server is up and running, then we figure out where the Nuxt instance is going to be. It's either going to be the directory we're running the command in, or if you've passed an argument, then we're going to load it from there. And then we pull in these two crucial commands, load and build Nuxt, from Nuxt kit itself. This helper function just returns Nuxt kit, but does so resolved not from where Nuxi is, but from your project itself. Now, Nuxt kit is basically an SDK, a development kit for Nuxt. It handles communicating with Nuxt. So there are lots of things that you can do in kit. So you can add auto imports or server middleware templates. You can configure Webpack or Vite, or you can handle things like adding additional modules. You can figure out whether you're running a Nuxt 2, 3 environment, etc., etc., etc. The point is that all of those are available to you in a consistent interface that works whatever version of Nuxt you're working with. So it's Nuxt 2 or Nuxt 3, it doesn't matter. You can run the same command and it should just work. So in this particular case, we pull in load and build Nuxt from kit. Now, if we pull load Nuxt in from kit, you'll see that what we end up with is this function here. So what we're going to do first is we look for Nuxt 3, Nuxt Edge, or Nuxt. And whichever one we have, we know what version it is now. So if it's Nuxt 3, well, it's version 3, and we can handle it this way. It's version 2, we handle it this way instead. So this should work whether or not you have Nuxt 3 or Nuxt Bridge. And then we pull, in the case of Nuxt 3, we pull load Nuxt, a different load Nuxt function from Nuxt 3, and we run that. In the case of Nuxt 2, we massage the options a little bit, but we'll also run the load Nuxt function from that Nuxt package. And similarly with build Nuxt, we do something very similar. We just pull this build function in from either Nuxt 3 or Nuxt Edge or Nuxt. So that's what we do and why we do it. So we pull in these load Nuxt and build Nuxt functions, and we'll look at what they do in a moment. Then we set up this load function, which is going to handle loading Nuxt and basically starting that for us. But we put it in a function because we're also going to create a watcher so that if you change things like your Nuxt config file, then we'll restart Nuxt entirely. Because actually, if you change those options, you probably just can't hot reload those. If you add a new module, for example, we really should go through the whole startup procedure again. So no need to look into all the details here, but that's basically what we're doing. We're figuring out, do we need to restart Nuxt or not? And then the first time, we start Nuxt using that load function. So what do we do when we start Nuxt? Well, we'll print out some nice information to let you know what's happening. And then we run the load Nuxt function. We clear the build directory, which is .nuxt by default. We await it to be ready. We write some types to the directory. We build Nuxt itself. So we've got a view application with an output file. And then we can say, set the server app, so the thing that's going to respond to incoming requests, to something that will respond to this built Nuxt version. Well, let's dive into what each of those pieces do. The first thing we do is run load Nuxt. And remember, this is coming from kit, but kit is just basically passing this on to load Nuxt in Nuxt 3. So if we pull open Nuxt 3 here, we have this load Nuxt function. And what load Nuxt function does is first loads the config. It makes some changes to that configuration temporarily. We're going to move that into an ISO place. And then it returns it. That's basically it. So what load Nuxt config does first is it runs another function called load config. This one's from another UnJS package called C12, which is a configuration loader for any project, but we're particularly using it for Nuxt. And that handles loading in the values in the Nuxt config file and merging them with configuration you might get from elsewhere. You might not know, but it's possible to have a global Nuxt config or located in either in your Nuxt project or in your home directory, for example, called .nuxtrc. And if you've used a global Nuxt module like Lucy's Nuxt Hue module, then you might have used .nuxtrc. That's also where we would store things like your preferences for whether or not you're willing to contribute to usage information on Nuxt. But basically, we use this to load in the Nuxt configuration file. That's also going to handle loading .env files and things like that. So we pull in the configuration, and then we do the next thing, which is we use a package called untyped. It's yet another UnJS package. And what that's going to do is handle merging the configuration you've provided with the defaults and then ensuring that everything is normalized, ready for Nuxt to operate off of it. So this Nuxt config schema here is the default values of all of your Nuxt options. And that is currently set up to include Nuxt 2 and Nuxt 3. So some of these options will be Nuxt 2 only, and they'll be marked with a version 2 tag, and some will be Nuxt 3, and they'll be marked with a version 3 tag. Now in here, you'll see all kinds of different options. So some of those options are going to be just straight values. So log level for Vite is going to be worn. Some of them are a little bit more complex though. You can pass this magic $resolve function, which receives the value that you pass in your Nuxt config file if you set it yourself. And this ability, the get function, to access some other part of the configuration. So here, Vite root is either going to be the value you provide or the value of source directory, if that is set elsewhere in your config. And that allows us to make quite a complex configuration file, which references other parts of itself, and yet which is able to merge options that you provide with options that Nuxt provides itself by default. That's untyped. And untyped also handles generating documentation for all of this. So all of the comments you see here, or the types even that are inlined, that gets extracted to create a type declaration file, which are the types that you see when you're actually typing in your Nuxt config. And it also produces the documentation that's on the Nuxt website for that configuration file. Very cool. And it should mean that you get really accurate information when you're looking at the docs or when you're doing when you're typing in your IDE. Because if we change this default value here, it's actually going to change in the documentation too, even if we forget to update it. So that's what we load, the default values from there, and then we merge that with the configuration you provide. We meld it all together with this magic apply defaults function from untyped. And then we return all of this Nuxt config as options. That options then gets massaged a little and gets passed to the create Nuxt function. When Nuxt is created, it doesn't actually do a great deal. It's mostly an object, which has some things like options. It has hooks, which is how Nuxt is so powerful. It's able to be adapted and changed. Different modules and even you yourself in your configuration can hook into different parts of the Nuxt lifecycle. And that, again, uses a package called Hookable, another Nux.js package, and definitely one that can be used in many, many different projects, completely independent of Nuxt. And when this ready function is called, we run something which is quite significant, this init Nuxt function. But basically that object, that Nuxt object, is defined here. We also have a virtual file system, which is where we put a lot of the templates, for example, that users or modules add to their code. Init Nuxt we'll look at in just a moment. But basically this function, this create Nuxt function, gets called when you load Nuxt, and then it gets passed back. And it will be initialized when we call ready. That's when init Nuxt will be called. So when we do run init Nuxt, what happens is that we run this function here. We'll add all the hooks that are registered by modules or by you to the hookable instance. We'll set a Nuxt context so you can run use Nuxt and all of the Nuxt kit magic can work. We'll initialize Nitro itself. I'll look at that in a moment. And we set some hooks ourselves. So we add some plugins to Vite and Webpack. We install some modules. We register some components to make them globally available to you. And we then say, we're all done. We're all ready to go. Before we carry on, let's look at what happens when we initialize Nitro. So init Nitro, at the moment, we have a Nitro Legacy, which is in this repository and is what we'll look at today. But we're actually migrating to something called NitroPack, where we have extracted the Nuxt 3 server and put it into a separate Nux.js package that any framework will be able to use. So definitely look at that in time. But for now, let's look at Nitro Legacy. Nitro Legacy basically pulls in the options that we have for Nitro, and it creates two different Nitro contexts, a dev context and a non-dev context, which is going to be our server. We set the virtual file system, we create the dev server, we combine all the Nitro hooks that we need access to with all the Nuxt hooks that it needs access to. It's a bit of a mess, but it ensures that we can keep logic separated between Nitro and Nuxt. We add some types, and we add some more things that we're going to do at different stages in the Nuxt lifecycle. For example, when we finish building our Vite server, then we're going to run a build on the Nitro server, and that Nitro server is then going to be able to handle requests with the Vite server that we've built. We'll look at that in a little bit more in a moment. But basically, all of that gets run, and we come back to our Nuxt dev command. We then build Nuxt. Now, that build Nuxt command, if you'll recall, is coming from Kit. Kit is running a build command, which is coming from Nuxt itself. So if we have a look at the build command from Nuxt, it's running this create app function, which basically assembles all the different files that are going to be part of your application. So all the different templates, some of them will be provided by Nuxt itself, like an entry file, some of the built-in Nuxt components, some built-in plugins, but some of them will actually be coming from you yourself. So it will scan all the files, all the plugins that exist in your application and pull those templates in. Some modules may be installing their own plugins too. By default, everything goes into this virtual file system, so it doesn't actually require interaction with the real file system, which is often a performance bottleneck, but it's actually just purely in memory attached to your Nuxt object. And so once we've done that and we've generated this app, created this context where all these files are available, then what we're able to do is actually run a build step. In development mode, we're going to watch things so we can refresh it when things change. But otherwise, we just run this bundle command directly, which is going to come from whichever builder you've selected. By default, Nuxt supports Vite and Webpack, but you could produce your own and just pass that as a builder option in Nuxt config. And in the case of Vite, we're going to just pull in the Vite bundle, which is going to take some Vite configuration. So whatever's by default in your Nuxt config, with these options added on top of it, because we couldn't do that in the schema, it's going to register a couple of hooks and then going to build Vite itself. Once all of that has been done, we then are going to be able to handle incoming requests with Nitro. Nitro has its own dev preset, which is a little bit different and a lot more complex compared to what you'll be running in production. The dev preset for Nitro has a pool of workers that handle incoming requests. These incoming requests get handled by Nitro loading in the output of your Vite or Webpack build, firing requests at it, and then returning responses. And you can basically see that we've set that up to return various different things. We have a debugging endpoint. We have a direct endpoint that hits the build assets, which are things that are produced by the output of your build command. There's other kinds of middleware that is directly attaching Nitro to your server middleware or to the middleware of Vite and Webpack itself, which will process incoming requests too. And all of that is wrapped up in a proxy, which takes it directly to the file that is produced by Vite. It's quite complex, looking at how the Vite handles the development server. But basically, once all of that happens, that then gets assigned to the server app of Nuxt, which is then what processes the incoming requests in your Nuxt dev server. That is a million foot overview of how all the different pieces of Nuxt work together. I hope it's helpful, at least in knowing where to start. If you're wanting to look and see something's going wrong, where would I look? Well, there are a lot of places where you might look, but they all work quite well together. And I would love to answer any questions you might have or give you any pointers if you're looking to explore the code base, either now, or you should feel very free to hit me up on Twitter or Discord if I can be of any help or service to you later on. Over to you, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Daniel, for that for that intro. A very fast crash course into how Nuxt operates. Yeah, so I didn't know about this Unjs thing. What is this? Basically packages that's all written in pure JavaScript, or what is it?
So it's, I mean, you're right. It's all written in pure JavaScript, but a lot of the focus is definitely in making things work in a universal way. So, for example, we have an Express equivalent or a Connect equivalent called H3. You'll be familiar with that if you've used any of the server middleware in Nuxt. It allows really cool things like directly returning a JSON object and not having to interact with a request and response node objects. But one of the great things about it is that it can run in a browser or it can run in a Cloudflare worker, which means we can have something that looks like a node server, looks like a node request object, but it actually works anywhere because it's in pure JavaScript.
Cool.
And it's also a lot faster than other alternatives out there. Sorry, that's just one example. But Unjs exists to take these things out of Nuxt and make them hopefully relevant to anyone building something, whether or not they're using Nuxt.
Okay, so from the Unjs package, you used a server. So it's not using Express.js anymore.
No. So Nuxt 2 used Connect, which was Express compatible middleware. We no longer use that in Nuxt 3. We now use this H3 orchestrator. So H3 isn't a server itself. It basically handles requests. We also have a server from Unjs called Listen with an H in it. And that basically creates a node-like server, but which doesn't rely on Node itself. So that allows us to handle the incoming requests, which we do with H3. The server itself, which is listening to the port and responding, is Listen. And behind them, you get Nitro, you get Vite, you get Nuxt, Nuxy.
So how would that work if, for example, in Vue Storefront, we are using the Express server? We would have to switch it out for this Listen or H3 server to migrate to version 3, or can we just use Express?
You can keep using Express. So the great thing is it's written in a way that it's such that it is compatible in terms of the API. There may be one or two packages which rely on it being a native node request object, and maybe you might have to look more closely at those. But out of the box, it should work. You shouldn't need to change things. You'll probably find that using H3 would be a bit faster than using Express, but you're totally welcome to go ahead and use it.
Okay, cool. So one quick message to the audience. If someone is watching this and does have a question for Daniel, don't be shy. Go ahead, write in the YouTube comments, and I will bring the question straight to Daniel. What else did I write down here? Yeah, these are more questions that everyone wants to know. Like, we know that the release candidate is close, but I was interested. What are, for example, things that are not stable enough yet that we say it's a stable version? What are like a little bit behind the scenes things to know that what makes something like migrating a framework like Nuxt from one major version to another? What are things that are still very challenging, so it takes so long, so much time?
So we're working on these all the time, but one of the things that you'll immediately notice, depending on the packages that you're using, your own dependencies, is that in the ecosystem there are a lot of packages which aren't compatible with ESM. So they might be written in CJS, which is actually totally fine, but they might also have a package which is a file, an export, which is written in ESM. So it has export default, whatever, and it uses import, but it's actually not a valid Node ESM package. It doesn't have a .mjs extension. And when you encounter things like that, you will struggle a little bit. You might have to add them to the build, your Nuxt build transpile array, or you might have to have Vite optimize them in development mode. So that's something that is definitely an ongoing pain point, and we're trying to figure out how to do that automatically for users, because we know how to detect them, and we've actually extracted this to an Node.js package of its own. So we know how to detect invalid Node ESM packages, but really the best fix is for those to be fixed upstream, because it won't just be a problem with Nuxt, it'll be a problem with anyone consuming them from an ESM context. But that's probably the greatest pain you might experience with Nuxt 3. Most things are starting to feel really, really nice now.
Nice. Yeah, and what is something that like, how do you manage like a migration from let's say Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3 to keep both versions like maintained? Like, I imagine you have to like, when you make one move on one side, you have to think about backwards compatibility. And is that a challenge? How does it even work? Like, what can you tell us about something like that?
So what we're trying to do is focus our effort on Nuxt Bridge as compared to obviously our effort is on Nuxt 3. We're wanting to make sure that Nuxt Bridge brings those features as well. One of the key things is that we're mostly adding new features, or we're improving the experience. So we'll do that first in Nuxt 3. Sometimes we'll do it at the same time in Bridge. Sometimes it will be a week or so before we backport it to Bridge to make sure that the experience is the same for people using that. I would definitely advocate that people use Bridge if they're still using Nuxt 2, because then they'll receive a lot of these benefits. But we're doing our best. Not everything can be backported because of differences in how Vue works between 2 and 3, and in some cases, pretty fundamental issues with how Nuxt 2 and 3 differ. So, for example, the mere fact that you're using that you have a Webpack 4 by default implementation in Nuxt 2 is going to change things. And partly to fix that, we have a Vite option in Bridge. But there are always going to be some things that differ slightly between Nuxt Bridge and Nuxt 3, even if we do our very best to keep them to a minimum.
Okay, cool. All right, so I don't have any further questions for myself from the audience, unfortunately. Also not. What can you tell us about like something that's coming next? Maybe beside the Nuxt 3, because I know that's like any moment now. Any moment. Supposedly this month we have the release candidate, or maybe the beginning of the next month. But what's going on for you after that? Like maybe besides Nuxt, do you have some other projects going on?
One thing that I'm really excited about, it's not for this month, but the Nuxt dev tools will be really nice. So we've been working on a project that is able to do some interesting, provide interesting feedback on what you're building, and we're developing this again in Untitled, but it's not public yet. Called WebLint, and a lot of what it does, it's able to check for core Web Vitals performance. We've been doing some great work with the Aurora team at Chrome. It's able to spot issues with that aren't Nuxt specific necessarily, but maybe to do with how you're building your app, and provide direct feedback on improving those. And being able to surface some of that in the Nuxt dev tools, I think will be an amazing experience. A lot nicer than, anyway, wait and see. That's going to be pretty cool. I think that's something that's exciting me a lot.
Cool, that sounds exciting. We have one question from the audience. Someone asks if the talks are going to be available later. Yes, it's going right after this. You can check it out on YouTube immediately. And one person that asks, Matteo Rigioni, in in the Wordle example you made live, you used a new server API functionality. If we implement server-side calls to services like commerce tools, won't we get a rate limited since Lambdas has a single IP? I don't really understand the question, but maybe you know what it is about.
So yeah, so that's absolutely something you should be taking into account. So basically, I guess if you're making all your calls from the client side, then you don't have to worry about being rate limited because there are a million different IP addresses making those calls. But on server side, if you're loading a million different requests all from the same IP, then that one computer is making all the requests to that API. So I guess there are a couple of ways of solving that. So one of them is using the new Nitro pack with its root caching rules, which allow you to do things like cache responses. So you would be able to say, look, I don't care. I want to deduplicate this between requests. I want to persist this for a second. I want to persist this for a minute, or just permanently cache this result for this API request. So there are things that you will be able to do to improve things at that level. I mean, I guess, and you can even implement that yourself to an extent by adding an inline cache within your file. But of course, rate limiting is something that you would have to deal with any server-side rendered framework that makes API calls. So I mean, it is something you would have to consider and look at what those limits might be.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, we also arrived at our time, so I will have to let you go, Daniel. I thank you very much for your talk and the answers to our questions, and I wish you a pleasant day.
It's been great. Thank you, Mark, and see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, yes, our next speaker is Maya Shavin. Many of you might know her already. She is a senior engineer at Microsoft, founder of Vue.js Israel, a Nuxt ambassador, and much more. And today she's going to talk about performant components with customization using Storefront Ui. So without further ado, Maya Shavin.
Of the hackathon, shall we? Okay. So first and foremost, a little bit about myself. I'm Maya Shavin, and I'm a senior software engineer in Microsoft. I'm also co-maintainer of Storefront Ui, which is the component library framework for e-commerce, which our main features in this talk today. I'm also founder of Vue.js Israel community, and I'm a book author and a blogger. I like to blog and write stuff about front-end development and anything interesting me. I'm also a Nuxt ambassador, a mega developer expert, and a Google developer expert. And a lot of people ask me where I'm originally from, so I need to put it inside. I'm from Vietnam originally, and I've been living in Israel for almost a decade. Yep. And you can always follow me or reach out to me on Twitter or GitHub at Maya Shavin, or my website, mayashavin.com. So let's talk about component library. When we talk about component library, you probably would think of Buildify, Bootstrap, Vuetify, Element UI, and a lot of popular component library that people are using. But what exactly is component library? So the very core features of component library is component. For this, it has to be reusable, which means that you have a sidebar. It has to be reusable enough so the sidebar can be opened from the left side with the menu inside dynamic content, or be opened from the right side with the cart content inside. And it has to be stylable. For example, we have a toast notification. It can be styled with different color to indicate different state of the notifications. And besides the styling, you still need to provide customizable, because again, component library is there for user to use, and user only want to customize according to the look and feel of the brand. For example, add to cart, user may not like the icon info. They want to have some art icon, or even they want to change the close button to a real close text. Responsive. Well, nowadays, all the applications I have to support responsiveness, which means the applications and the web applications have to look good in both desktop and also in tablet or mobile or anything other than these three. And it has to be isolated enough and testable, which means one of the main advantages of component library is that someone else tests and the test was covered during the development of component library, and you as the user would just take the component fully trusted that it's already tested and can be used without a lot of bugs and without him cracking his head over writing tests over it. So for this, I like to divide into two different main criteria of component in a component library. The first one is visual consistency. What it means is the palette, what is the main theme of the component library provide is called the UI. The second one is functional consistency, which means what users see straightforward, understand how it works, and work as is expected. Say a sidebar, have an overlay, have a button to close. You click on overlay, it closes the sidebar. Click on the close, it's also close the sidebar. Nothing unexpected, nothing surprising. For example, you click on close and you have a dialogue or something. That's not supposed to do. Or a card. For product card, where you can click on an icon with the similar card icon, and it will add the product into your cart. And this we call this the UX size of a component. So in general, component library is not about just a bunch of code snippets. It's part of a bigger pictures, which is the design system, where you talk about pattern, talking about style guide, talking about documentation, and so on and so forth. So, in short, build a good component library means you're building a good design system. And that's the talk. Enjoy. Now, I'm just joking. We still have, this is just the beginning. Let's talk about how users select a component library. Well, user is you, developer. It's also me, developer. We always choose a component library based on several criteria. First, it has to meet the goal that we have in mind. Performance, customizability, simplicity, ease of use, how easy to use the component library in general. So let's talk about how do we meet as the goal as the component library development team. Well, the short answer is that no, you can't, because you don't know what users are looking for. You don't know exactly what's in user mind. They can looking for a component that is generic. They can looking for a component that is have a lot of transition, animation, and so on and so forth. What you can do is, instead of trying to meet the user goal, you need to define what you want the component library to achieve. And planning on top of that, provide a style guide design on the component design based on the planning on the spec, implementation, and keep revisiting to make sure that the implementation is done well and and it's practical for the user to use. So it's avoid all this mess about designer thinking one way and developer thinking the other way. In general, good planning will help to reduce the amount of breaking changes. Well, breaking changes is unavoidable. Even for the best framework library, we still have some breaking changes, but the less frequent the breaking changes, the better the component library under user eyes. So how in Storefront Ui we define the goals? Well, first of all, is the component library for every need, like for everyone's need, or the component have a lot of component, like component library have a lot of components, generic component like Bootstrap, or it have to be supported. It supports only desktop and then on mobile later. No, we decided that it had to be focused on e-commerce solely because that's what we want. We want to focus on e-commerce, to build e-commerce website. Component have to be specific on e-commerce, and because of the nature of the industry, we prioritize customization so that the brand will be able to customize according to their look and feel. And our code base, because we prioritize the customization, we only plan for the code to compatible for 80% of the design cases. And lastly, important, mobile first. Why? Well, think about it. Do you ever do online shopping nowadays with the laptop, or you just lying on your sofa and do it over your phone? Right? Let's talk about performance. Is the faster loading is everything about performance? The answer is no. Performance is more than just about the faster loading initial time. Just the same thing with accessibility would not be just about Lighthouse score. I saw a lot of websites that got 100% in the Lighthouse score, still not accessible. Performance, in my view, have two different parts, development and delivery. Development is all about how you define the implementation, how you structure the code, how you define the prompts, and all of this affect how the developer will implement, the speed of implementation, and the performance of the components, because you have dependency, say virtual scrolling library, like animation library, like Lodash, and so on. All of this will decide whether you be able to have a simpler structure, easy to maintain. The next developer come on board, they will be able to pick up this development and continue from there, so that we will have a faster delivery, because faster development, faster delivery, user can have the new version and bug fixes much faster. And that also including on bundling speed. If you write the component correctly, you also say in bundling speed, consume size, and installing effort, and so on. All of them very, very related to each other. Customizability. Are you ready for developers, other fellow developers as your user to try to break it? Well, no one likes other people code, so other developer probably wants to customize as much as they can because they think that's supposed to do. So how do we customizability? How do we enable customizability? Well, customizability is about two things. First thing about color palette, about baiting, bigger, smaller, and generic things, or even about size, which we have a set of size of icon, which common used. But then someone say, okay, I don't want this set of icon. I want something much bigger. So this is something need to customize, right? This is called style guide customizability, where you can customize color theme, typography, padding, margin, size, and anything. And then the next one is, let's say, the set of icon. User want to be able to customize, like use their own icon, something like Facebook, GitHub, and Twitter, something not common for e-commerce. Well, for that, we have to enable the customizability for component-based, which include icon, content design, and anything that out of the scope related to functionality. For style guide, first question, do we use CSS class to customize? Well, no, don't use it, because then you deal with a lot of things like explicitity and which one low first, one low last, on the CSS ruling, and end up with a lot of important. SCSS variable is better, but again, because it requires compiling into a real CSS file, so sometimes you get into this problem, which will kind of make you feel very bad. So the best solution is using CSS variable. We're using CSS variable by defining the set of palette of style guides that we using across the component library. And then when user want to change it, he just need to make class a scope, class in the component, and provide the value he wants for the specific variable, and everything will change accordingly. How do we customize the inside content? Well, let's say I have a button. This is how we implement the accept button. And the user say, okay, I want to add an icon. Okay, fine. We're going to add an icon, and of course, an icon position left or right. And then you say, I don't want to have just this size. I want to be a bit bigger, want to be able to control the size of the icon. Then we have another problem. But this is not the end. What if the user want to have an on-click on the icon? What if? Endless props, it doesn't mean you can cover all the cases. What better is that you provide the basic default implementations and allow users to override the contents with their own implementation. Like in this case, the user will write with an icon and a text and the buttons to render correctly. And this is how we implement the accept button. We're using slot. So with the normal implementation, we cover most of the case, 80%. And with slot take care of 20% left, and we cover everything. How do we customize icon? Well, we have a set of icon. This is how the accept button with icon from Storefront Ui icon libraries look like. But user want to say, okay, I want to use a cloud icon, which is not in the list. So what we do a research about it is that the icon is an SVG, will be only have one single color because it's an icon. You're not supposed to have more than one single color. For the sake of it, for the minimal form, because more than one color will cause confusion in user visual, and it's hard to concentrate and it's hard to understand what the icon is doing. And the icon is supposed to be SVG paths because SVG is king. And SVG help you to be able to scale in size. And in the SVG file of the icon, you have two things. View box, which is where the icon will be rendered in respect to the size of the view box, and the path, where the browser will take the path and start to draw the icon inside the view box. So for that, for icon, we modify a little bit to accept also the name of the icons from the icon library and also the path of the SVG and the view box and the size and the color. Now, similarly, if we want to override the colors, we also allow hexadecimal value of the box and size. We also do the same approach. What happens, you may ask, if the icon have more than one path? That's possible. Well, for that, we're using an array. So basically, you can pass a name to the icon, which the component will know that it's come from these accept icons, from the Storefront UI icons, or you can find, you can pass a single path or multiple path as an array, and it will just work. What about functionalities customization? Unfortunately, we haven't found a way to fully support this. For example, here a radio button, and in material design, they implement it with the button separately, the input field separately, and the label separately. So it's very hard to override, to add another on-click event on the label only and on the button only. If you add the event, it has to be on the whole component itself. Okay, the next topic is how you convince user, how you make user happy within 5 minutes, even less. You don't have that 5 minutes. The user nowadays have so many component library that if you don't provide, don't make user feel at ease and happy, they will not use it. So for Storefront UI, we ship it. How do we deliver? Yep, we ship it. Well, in general, we use the shipping bundle code, which the classic way where we install the plugin and the install function with a very long way. Every time we add a new component, we need to add this file also. The problem with this is that it includes the whole library in productions bundle, with costly, and we don't have any control over the bundle code or whatsoever. So instead, we decided to change the raw source code, which means user import what they want to use. And of course, they can also install the component they want to use the component in the global scope. And the downside of it is that it doesn't work at the CDN because we don't bundle the whole library. And it needs Webpack or any bundle management tool to compile before using in order to use also. Well, the good news is that we trade off with full control on the bundle code, full tree shaking, everything including the web applications. There's no extra piece that you don't want in there. And nowadays, most of applications are developed with some sort of bundle view management tool like Webpack or like Vite and so on. So the next aspect is how we organize code, because we want to attract also contributors. So we organize code in a very simple, very straightforward way. Let's say template. We have a standalone blocks. CSS selector. We use BEM. We stand for block element and modifier conventions to make sure the user understand what this class is about. And props. We use clear and concise name, and slot. We use scope slot. Document. Well, there's 3 questions when you do a documentation for component. How good it is, how to use the component, and whether it's able to play in order for users to understand how it works with different props. For that, we're using a storybook, and it works well. But other questions, let's say how to set up, how to contribute, and whether the component library is actually what the user is looking for. This we're using on this question, we answer by using ViewPress to host our documentation. And lastly, I know on this just infrastructure tool, but the main thing is the content. Writing is only hard. For that, we automate. We don't want to keep going and repeat ourselves in every place in the documentation. So we built one of our team member, Eddie, he built a process to auto-generate it by going through the directory and extract all the markdown and all the CSS variable using regex, and then fill in the placeholder in the templates for the document, for the related document, and then generate it. And that's it. We have the documentation taken care. The last aspect of component library, how to select it, is whether the component library is simple enough. Well, for that, we're using atomic design to make sure the component is breaking down into smaller parts and built on top like a pyramid. Atomic design is the design pattern made by Bradford, and it's very common nowadays. So if you're interested in design pattern, feel free to check it out. So basically, it's kept atoms with all the miniest component that doesn't rely on any one. And then from there, you build the molecules from these atoms. An organism is just a combination of molecules and atoms together to form, let's say, a page, let's say a twig, and so on, and template. And from this, we build templates in order to render and to make into a proper page for our application. Okay, and before we finish, any other tips? Yeah, some other tips for such as lazy loading, whenever you need to lazy loading. If there's someone else do some solutions better than you or faster than you, how much you would take for solving a problem, let them use them. For example, image handling. In Storefront UI, we have Storefront UI image component, and we have Storefront UI Cloudinary component, where we allow users to use Cloudinary and enjoy the image optimization out of the box provided by Cloudinary, and that works. And lastly, the most important thing is that always think that you as your own component library user, because think developer first, because they are your single and only user that you should care. So just a bit about Storefront UI. We are the first Vue.js UI component library dedicated for e-commerce. Was initially developed by this Vue Storefront team, and still it's open source, and it's have anything you want to have for e-commerce component library. I make a demo a while ago using Vue Storefront UI in Date, which now reversal. So check it out. And lastly, if you want to support Storefront UI projects, please give it a star or contribute or join our team. We are looking for a lot of contributors, a good contributor, a good core team members, because, well, I don't have a lot of times to participate in the project recently. So I will appreciate that we have a good hand to take care of this amazing project. And thank you for joining my talk, and hope you enjoy it.
All right, thank you, Maya, for that talk. And here she is, live and in color. Hey, Maya, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Usually, haven't been doing the mommy here.
Yes,
So
who's
how
this
you
little
doing?
guy?
Yeah, he's a little cute guy, isn't he? He's my last child. Well, we call him a Corona baby.
Ah, oh, so she was born during Corona times.
Yeah, we were
Okay.
born like in June. Mhm.
All right, cool. So, how are you? I already asked you that, right? How are you? How are you holding up in all of this? Are you still active in the Storefront UI project at the moment?
Well, I'm mainly not that active in development anymore. I mean, I haven't visited the code base for some time already, but mainly talking like in general concept, like giving some planning for Storefront UI 2.0, which we will start development very soon. But yeah, not actively develop anymore. I think we have other core team member that is super talented and super and super devoted to the project right now.
Cool. And do you know what's coming next for Storefront UI? Are there any? Do you know if there are any plans for some new versions or some new features that it's going to have?
Well, I know that yeah, we do have a lot of plan regarding the version one, the current version, version one something. It's hard to remember, but that I live in the good hands of the core team member, and we've been fixing bugs, improve the performance, and we're trying to improve the image optimizations for Storefront UI. And for the next version of Storefront UI, which we are actually planning right now, is for version 2.0, will be implementing a more like breaking changes. We'll be implementing the better structure with the much better code, much better straightforward code base, and of course, it's going with together with the Vue 3 composition API. So yeah,
Nice.
that's the plan.
Cool. That sounds exciting.
Yeah, it is.
And so a quick call to anyone who's watching this in the audience on YouTube. If you have questions for Maya, just ask them in the comments and I will bring the question right to her. In the meanwhile, I have a question. What is different from Storefront UI? Between Storefront UI and other front-end frameworks like Bootstrap, Vuetify, those kind of things.
Oh well, you know, Bootstrap is more generic component library where you can have all the other stuff, all the other components, every component you want to have in a generic sense, that one fit all, something like that. And for Vuetify, and mainly for Vue, for it's same sense with the it's the same sense with Bootstrap, but it's specifically for Vue projects, and it's implemented material design. I think material design. It used to. I think it's inspired by material UI. It used to be. They used to have a framework like that, and it's not for e-commerce. So it's like you can use it for e-commerce, but it's definitely not for e-commerce build. And Storefront UI is the very narrow scale that focus mainly on e-commerce only. And sorry, the nanny ticket, yeah. And yep, so Storefront UI focus mainly on e-commerce, and we develop with the sense of mobile first, and everything will be tested on mobile before everything else. So it doesn't fit all. Like if you want a landing page or a website or an enterprise project, maybe that's Storefront UI wouldn't fit the case, because we don't have a lot of components. We only have a component specifically for e-commerce.
Okay, cool. I have one more question, or let's say Aether has one more question that is not it's not tech related. So lately, you have created some avatars or some drawings, illustrations of some people in the tech world, including one of me. And Aether wants to know, when is his sticker coming out as Darth Vader?
Oh, so he won Darth Vader. I thought he won Anakin. Right? Okay. Yeah. So, well, you can send me. I think that you can already start sending me your pictures, and I will try to get it done as soon as possible. I mean, at the moment, I'm pretty busy with all my works, my kids, and my drawing, and also I also have quite a few requests to draw the version of you in a cute way. So yeah, so I may pump you on top of the queue if Darth Vader send me the force or Yoda send me the force.
Nice. So to show these illustrations, this doesn't have to do anything with Vue Storefront anymore, but I still want to show that you are a creative person, and like the one you made for me, I really love it. And let me show you how it is. Where is here? You can see in my header this one. This is
I love it too. He's the Vue hero, the Tor of the Vue hero and a Vue Storefront hero.
Yes,
and he also a Tor.
Yes, I have a Vue Storefront Unitor or something, and I have a Vue Hammer. Nice.
Yep.
Yeah, I really love that. So these are the things that Maya makes, but she has a lot of backlog. So if you want one, I think you have to get in line. I think I got the first one, right? You made it for my birthday.
Yeah,
thank you.
You got the first one, and the first and the only tour. So if you want another tour, I'm not going to make it because it's reserved tomorrow.
You'd have to choose Iron Man or Captain America or something.
Yeah, indeed. But it's fun. Yep.
All right. Warrior Dev says that she thinks it's cool. Oh,
Thank
no,
you.
cute. Sorry. Good. All right. I won't keep you any more of your day. Maya, thank you very much for having this talk ready so fast, and of course also for the answers to my questions.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm really happy to be here. To be with the Vue Storefront people that I really loved, and so have a nice Thursday, I guess.
Yes, you too. Have a pleasant rest of your day, and I will see you around. Bye-bye, Maya.
Yep. Bye-bye.
All right, so that concludes the 3 days of Flash Talks we had here at Vue Storefront at the Hackathon. But that doesn't mean that the Hackathon is over. It's not even in the halftime yet. It will be until next week, Sunday or Monday, depending on which time zone you are. But to be safe, it's midnight from Sunday to Monday. So if you're in the US, it's Sunday. If you are in Europe, it's sometime in the morning hours, on the first morning hours of Monday. All right. Anyways, thank you everyone that's participating in the hackathon. If you haven't already registered, but you are interested in joining, you can still sign up. It's not a problem. Just go to vuestorefront.io, and then on the blog, you will find some information there. And you can also go to our social media. We are also posting about that there. All right. Thank you, everyone, very much for watching. And I hope you all have a pleasant rest of the week, which is not that much anymore. And of course, a pleasant weekend. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.